Today is May 3rd, 2013. We are at the American Legion in Peoria, Illinois. We are interviewing Mr. Victor Reynolds. My name is Cheryl Walker. I'm with the Illinois State Library, and I will be interviewing Mr. Reynolds. Mr. Reynolds was born. Mr. Reynolds, when were you born?
When I was born, October 30th, 1921.
Okay. And Mr. Reynolds was born in Peoria, Illinois.
Peoria, Illinois.
Okay. Today, Tabitha McLean is here doing the transcribing. Mr. Reynolds, can you please tell us what branch of service you served in?
United States Navy.
And what was your highest rank?
Boatswain mate first class.
Okay. Would you like to share with us, you were in the service from November 14th, 1939 until January 26th, 1946?
Correct. And then I was in, it's a long story, short story. They had me on disability. I went out on disability. All of a sudden, I get a telephone call to go to a doctor over on Sheridan Road. So I went, it was above Reichert's grocery store. I went to the doctor. The next thing I know, I get a letter from the VA telling me that my disability had been cut to 10%. Now it gets a little touchy. I wrote a letter to the VA and told them to stick it where the sun didn't shine, the 10%. The first month that they took the 10% away from me, I joined the reserves across the river over at East Peoria. And I stayed in the reserves. 1950, it was in, I was on active my training duty. I was down in Guantanamo Bay, Cuba, and my wife got a letter. I was being recalled. I was recalled in September 1950. Went to San Diego, trained for a couple of weeks on landing barges. And I was in Japan about a month. I went to Japan. And we were getting ready to go up and help the men that were trapped at the reservoir, the Chosin Reservoir. We were going to leave the next day. And I got a message through the Red Cross that my father was dying. And I had a choice. I had 3 kids at the time. Because I was recalled, I could either stay in and disregard the Red Cross request. But the commander would honor the request from the Red Cross and put me on emergency leave, and I would fly home. But they'd have to discharge me. Well, I wanted to get home, so I told them I'll take discharge. So then on November 26th, I was discharged on leave. And I flew back to the States, and by the time I got back to the States, my dad had died. And that was the end of it.
So from 39 to 1946, you were stationed in the Southwest Pacific?
That's what they call the Southwest area.
Mm-hmm.
I was in China. I was a China sailor on the river gunboats. We had 3 of them in our area. We had the USS Wahoo, USS Luzon, which was a flagship, and the USS Mindanao. But the Mindanao was at Chongqing. And all we had was radio contact with the now I'm confused myself. I was on the flagship Luzon. The Wahoo was in Shanghai. The Tutuila was in Chongqing. And when the Chinese or the Japanese aircraft would take off from the airfield in Hankow, where we were station ship, we would notify the Tutuila by radio, notify them that Japanese bombers were on the way when they were bombing the devil out of Chongqing. Wahoo stayed in Shanghai. We were stationed in Hankow at that time. We rotated the Wahoo and the Luzon. And at that time, we were in Chongqing, or in Hankow. And on November 25th, November 25th, 1941, I had orders to go up to the American consulate in Hankow and pick up some new orders that had come in. We were ordered to pack our gear and make a run for Shanghai. In doing so, the next morning, on November 26th, 1941, before the war started, as we were making preparations to get ready to get underway, a regiment or a command of Japanese Marines took over our pontoon causeway and wouldn't let us throw the lines off. They were going to make us stay there. Chief Boatswain Mate Rollins grabbed a fire axe and severed the forward lines, then went back and severed the after lines that we were tied to the pontoon causeway with. And we got up steam, and at that time 2 Japanese destroyers pulled up alongside. We were heading north upriver. We had to turn around to a 180-degree turn to go to Shanghai. 2 Japanese destroyers pulled up and tried to hedge us in to the dock. And we got up steam, had enough steam, and I had the wheel watch at the time. The commander says, pull between the 2 destroyers, and I pulled it, just steered right between the 2 destroyers, got out in the middle of the Yangtze River, did a 180-degree turn, and headed south. The Japs left us alone. They tailed us, but they left us alone. We steamed day and night till we got to Shanghai. We got to Shanghai, and the 4th Marine Regiment had already left Shanghai. They were at sea, heading towards the Philippines. We were given liberty that day, liberty till midnight. And we left the skeleton crew aboard ship, and we got to Shanghai. The Wahoo was already making preparations to get underway. We had liberty till midnight. We all got back safe and sound. And at 0600 on the 27th or 28th, we got underway heading towards the Philippines. Now we're 2 flat-bottom river gunboats. We took off at 0600. We threw off the lines, and we headed down the Wangpu River out to the Yellow Sea. We got to the Yellow Sea, started getting a little rough, so we took Manila lines and secured them to the side of the ship so that when we were on deck, we could have something to hold on to. You want to go on like this? Okay.
Were you rocking like this?
Flat. We were flat bottom. 2 flat bottom river gunboats. And we started getting rough weather. And we were about halfway to Formosa, because we were going to go down the coast of Formosa, cut across from Shanghai. Spotters spotted aircraft approaching. There was about 200 Japanese bombers flew over us about couldn't have been more than 1,500 to 2,000 feet in the air. It's just like they'd taken off from Shanghai. We got past that. We got off of the coast of Formosa, and I thought we joined the Japanese Navy because the whole Japanese fleet, carriers, aircraft carriers, transports, destroyers, cruisers, battleships, everything that attacked Hong Kong, French Indochina, and Manila, Philippines. We passed through the whole Japanese attack force. They sent 2 destroyers to stop us. And as we're traveling south, our starboard side is towards the Japanese fleet. These 2 destroyers pull up alongside of us. And it happened to be that I had the wheel watch again. I was on wheel watch at the time, so I had the wheel. Admiral Glassford's on the bridge. Our whole gunnery crew was at their stations and everything. We went to general quarters. The Japanese send a message through a flashing light, told us to turn around and go back to our previous anchorage. Now, all this is ingrained in my mind. I can remember everything, every word that was said. Admiral Glassford, after Hump Campbell, the chief quartermaster, read the message to Admiral Glassford. The Admiral turned to Hump Campbell and he says, "Mr. Campbell, send the following message. We are proceeding on our present course at our present rate of speed. Bon voyage." I thought they were going to blow us out of the water. We were in general quarters. We had our 2 3-inch guns trained on them. It hit us, sunk us so fast it made your head swim. Sent the message. They pulled back into formation and with their warships and left us alone. And we got to the southern tip of Formosa. We run into a typhoon. We got 30, 40, 50-foot seas. And these are flat bottom river gunboats, and we just were popping around like corks. We put a radio call in. The commanders sent a message to Com 16, which was naval headquarters in Manila, that we were in trouble. Oahu was in trouble. They were following us. And they sent out 3 ships to get us back in, help us get back into dry anchorage. It was so bad that we were the screws or the engines, the propellers were out of the water 50% of the time. We would be up in the air and down in the water, just popping around like corks. We got into, we proceeded on with 3 relief ships help into Manila. That's how I got to Manila. And we were anchored in Manila Bay, right inside the breakwater, when the Japs bombed Pearl Harbor.
How did you guys hear about Pearl Harbor?
Pardon?
How did you hear about Pearl Harbor?
Terrible.
Was the message sent over line, or how did you get the message?
The message came from Pearl that they were under attack at that time. We got word. Of course, we went to quarters right away, told us what had happened, and we started making preparations for battle ourselves. But it was about 1 o'clock in the morning, and I heard Commander Jordan, our executive officer, running down the deck because there was only a skeleton crew. I'd gone ashore early when we got to Manila, and I had about 3 or 4 beers. I wasn't feeling any pain, but I said, I'm going back to the ship. I'm not going to stick around out here. So I went back to the ship, got in my bunk. My bunk, the truth, my bunk is floating. That's just the way it felt. But anyway, I took my bunk, rolled it up, took it out on a fantail of the gunboat, and laid it up on a rack, and I climbed up there and went to sleep. And Commander Jordan was running around screaming bloody murder that, oh my God, like an old hen. And we went to quarters about 7 o'clock. The guys started coming back aboard ship. Shore Patrol was trying to round up all the sailors and get everybody back to their ships. But there were 2 handfuls of naval craft in Manila Bay at that time. Canopus, submarine tender. The USS Holland. A couple of destroyers, the Pillsbury and Perry, I think. But I couldn't. And the USS Boise. Boise was was part of the Pacific Fleet, not the Asiatic Fleet, but the Pacific Fleet. And she'd made a run out there, and she was getting up steam to get out of there. She come out of Cruisers Battles Force, which was attached to the cruisers that were in Pearl Harbor when Pearl was hit.
Did you think you were going to be going back to Pearl Harbor?
No, we couldn't. Hell, we couldn't have. We'd gone through enough rough water that we know that if we got halfway to Pearl, we'd be underwater.
So you were staying there in the Southwest Pacific. You were in Manila, and you were gearing up for battle.
Yeah.
And at that point, were you all told to stay on ship?
Oh, yeah.
You couldn't go off ship at that point.
No.
And did you leave port?
No, the day the war started, we were called to quarters at about 0800 in the morning. And the admiral said, we're going to have to put up with what we got. We didn't have anything, but we had 2 3-inch 51s for the main battery and 10 30 caliber machine guns. And we were as well armed as, well, the destroyers had 5-inch guns on them, but the Canopus submarine tender. And the destroyers had 5-inch guns, but we had 3-inch. The war started, and we were there. So we had to wait until we got orders. We weren't going to make a run for it or anything like that, because we couldn't take a chance, even with the ship, get everybody killed.
So what were your first orders from that point on?
Get ready for battle. And we were called to quarters at 0800, and we were at war.
And okay, so you were called to battle, you were at war. What did you do?
You had got our guns,
Okay.
ammunition, and everything stored, everything, get it out, ready to start using.
Okay. So then what happened?
Well, we had air raid alerts all day long that day, but we didn't see any Japanese planes, no Japanese. They were hitting the coast up north. They were making their landing up north. Motor Torpedo Squadron, which was stationed Buckley's Motor Torpedo Squadron, were stationed in Manila. They took off. They made a run on Subic Bay, sunk a couple Japanese ships, and the small motor torpedo boats blew a couple of them out of the water. I can remember the names of them: 35, 36, 37, 33 numbers of the boats. And the ones that were successful that got through came back into port that evening, got back. But we didn't see any Japanese until the following night. And they must have had a force of Japanese already on the island that had been living there, whatever it was. They were sending up red and green flares. You could hear the bombers coming. You're using dive bombers at night. You could hear them coming, and all of a sudden, it just all hell broke loose. They hit Nichols Field first, which was the Army airfield in Manila. Then they started in, and we just waited till it was our turn to unload. But we stayed inside the breakwater that night. They just about destroyed our total Air Force that first night. Everything but the bombers. They didn't get the bombers. Bombers were up at Clark's Field. And of course, they did the same thing that they did at Pearl. They landed all the crafts, had them on the field, and of course, the Japanese came and just started bombing and just destroyed about 90% of everything. Same thing they did at Pearl. But the people of Manila knew that night that there was a war on. Boy, they came down. We could follow the planes as they dove in, dropping their bombs. They weren't close enough to us for us to unload on them. Morning came. We got orders to get underway. We went over to the Naval Ammunition Depot to rearm to get more 3-inch shells. That's about what happened the first day. Of course, about noon of that day, when we went over to the ammunition depot, Navy Yard was still burning like hell. It was probably an area take from Knoxville to, say, Wisconsin. Everything was afire.
Were you over there when the atomic bomb went off?
Oh, yeah, in Japan. I was a prisoner in Japan then.
Did you suffer any from that?
No. Our stick guard, we had two kinds of guards. We had stick guards, carried big clubs, and gun guards. And when I was in Japan, I worked in the rail yards. And Pops, I was on a special details, splicing wire and doing things like that with wire and manila line. And our stick guard was an old man. He never carried a gun, but we talked back and forth. And he said last night that B-29s, B-29s, many of them hit Hiroshima. And Toxon Japanese died. He said they dropped a heat Bagadan. Bagadan is bomb. They dropped a heat Bagadan, which was a heat bomb, which was an atomic bomb. Then 2 days later, he told us that on the 7th of August in 1945 in Japan, he told us that they dropped another heat bomb on Nagasaki. And many Japanese had died. That's all we knew about it. So we started thinking, that maybe they're taking out all the big cities. And where we were at Nagoya is probably the third biggest town in Japan. And we knew darn well they weren't going to hit us because 72% of the town had been burned out already. They lost 72% of the city. City 5 times bigger than Peoria. If you can imagine just the firebombing every day and every night.
Where were you captured as a prisoner?
Pardon?
Where were you captured as a prisoner?
May the 6th, 1942.
Were you out at sea?
No, we'd already sunk our ship. We scuttled the Luzon 30 days before they actually surrendered. And we were manning big gun, 14-inch gun on Fort Hughes. Right off the end of Crigador was like a tadpole. It started out big and mountainous and then come down to a small sand hooker point down, and there was about 200 yards separation from Hooker Point to Fort Hughes where we were at. After we sunk the ship, we took over all the Army positions on Fort Hughes. That's how I got the Army distinguished with 2 oak leaf clusters.
And what were you doing down there?
We were just artillery fire. We returning artillery fire, setting up beach defense positions for the landing because we knew they were going to land. They had us surrounded. By that time they'd taken Manila and they'd taken the Cavite side of the shoreline. So we were in between two fire zones. And they were in between 2 of them, believe me. We'd get out, we'd fire our weapons, their big guns. We'd fire them 3 times and then duck for cover because we knew we were going to get a broadside from either side, one or the other.
Is that when you received your Purple Heart?
Pardon?
Is that when you received your Purple Heart?
No, if I would have been like the senator from Connecticut, who's now Secretary of Defense, if I'd have been like him, why, I'd have probably had 10 of them. Every time he got scratched, why, he got a Purple Heart. I had to laugh at it when I read his report. But anyway, I got hit in the back with a I don't know what, probably a 12-inch, 14-inch piece of lead about that long. It was about like that, and it was about that thick. It was off of a shell. Parrish was standing alongside him, and he hollered out. He says, "What the hell's the matter with you?" "I'm hit." The shell had exploded right in the hatch, killed 3 or 4 soldiers. But I got hit, but it was pretty well spent when it hit me. But it hit me flat, right in the middle of the back. My back was all black, just black and blue right now. I thought they had me, but they didn't. I didn't get a Purple Heart on that hill. If I'd have got a Purple Heart every time I got nicked or scratched, I'd have had a chest full of them.
How many men were in the POW camp with you?
Well, I was in many. The first prison camp I was in was Camp 3 at Cabanatuan. That's where they separated the sailors and the soldiers. Sailors and the Marines were together, and the soldiers and the Air Force were on one side of the gully. We were on the other side of the gully. There were probably about 3,000 of us. Discipline was terrible. The Army, somebody smuggled some booze in, whatever it was, gin or alky or whatever it was. And 4 soldiers got all lathered up, walk out the gate, beat the hell out of the guard. Got down the road about a block, no more than 75 yards from the main gate. And it was a Japanese warrant officer was there, and they worked him over. Boy, the troops rounded them up, brought them back, tied him up in front of the commandant's house, shack or whatever it was he was living in. Tied him up, just beat the living daylights out of him. Of course, this is in Manila. This is hot. The next morning, they're still there, pouring water on them and then letting that sun beat down on them, just really, really giving them the devil. At about 4 o'clock in the afternoon, it was probably about 1,600 hours. The guards came to our side of camp wanted 8 men to do some pick and shovel work. So they picked out 8 of us and marched us out into the field and started marking off. And we knew what was going to happen. They were marking off 4 places, 4 graves. And about 1700 hours, which would be 5 o'clock in the evening, we'd already they made one guy lay down, measured him off, and then we knew what to do. So we pick and shoveled a place about this deep. They marched the 4 men out, both camps, both sides of the ravine, had to get out there in formation and watch. And me being one of the shovelers or one time and the pick the next time, we were maybe from here to the door, away from them. And he marched the 4 guys out. And he had a firing squad. He had a 12-man firing squad. And the Gunzo, the sergeant that was in charge of it, they didn't blindfold them. They didn't do anything. They had their hands tied behind their backs. Marched the 4 men out. The firing squad took their position. And 12 rifles went off. Then a Japanese warrant officer pulled his weapon out of his holster and marched over to the grave of the 4 men and shot each one of them in the head. And they made all the guys in camp on both sides of the ravine, the Army and the Marines and the Navy, made everybody watch it. So that you knew that you did something wrong, you were going to get shot. Then it was about a week later, they put us into shooting squads. 10 men in a squad. And if any man in that squad escaped, they'd shoot the other 9. So that limited the amount of escapes that you could have. Because, I wanted to go over the hill. Over the hill is get out of there. I wanted to get out of there. But I'm thinking of the 9 men that are in my squad. What's going to happen to them? And I'm not going to be responsible for 9 other men. Some guys didn't care who got shot. But we had 6 guys go over the hill. First night we were down in Palawan. First night, 6 men. I did know one of the kids' names, but I don't remember it now. But we stayed in Cabana de Juan for about 3 months. Then they started taking squads or men out on working details. We were building roads. I had to go out on a detail that went to Palawan. That's where I got racked up down in Palawan. It took me to Palawan with 342 men. Frank Parrish, one of my shipmates, was with me. We were in the same squad. And we started building the Japanese airfield. And we had first 6 men went over the hill, and they just called us out in the open field by the commandant's house where he was living in. Called us out there, explained the situation to us that we were in shooting squads, and that what could happen to us. You know, you get 6 guys that take off, and you got a chance of another 25 or 30 men getting shot. That's all we talked about was escaping, and I wasn't going to be responsible for somebody else. I had enough problems taking care of myself. But we went down in Palawan, they killed everybody after I left there, after I got hurt. They were down to 100 and I think 100, they were down to 150 men. The other men had come back to Manila and on stretchers or somewhere. They were injured, snake bit, or whatever it was that happened. They had gone back to Manila and they were in the hospital in Manila. And on the 13th of April, 1943, we had finished one runway and we had another runway we had to put dirt in. And we used small gauge railway dump trucks. They were, where you could tip them over and dump the dirt out, and then guys could scatter it around. My car, 3 of us on it, 2 on the side and 1 in the back pushing. We had to push it across the airfield. And we'd made 4 or 5 trips already. So we made a deal with our guards. We'd make 10 trips, and then we get a 5-minute break period. Because the sun was just beating down. Half of us didn't have any clothes at all. We just had shorts on. In fact, I think I was barefooted at the time, didn't even have shoes. And we got our car filled with dirt, guys filled it. And we were pushing it on this railroad track, and it jumped the track. And of course, like a nut, I stayed behind because my legs were in better shape than the other guys. they were on the side and they were getting the logs and everything, trying to lift it back on. Well, they couldn't, not full of dirt. So it was sticking up like that, the steel part of the bed. And I heard somebody say, "Look out." And with that, I swung around my right side, and that damn thing hit me just below the knee. The second car coming down the incline hit me at the knee and here and just snapped my leg. Snapped it right, didn't snap it off, but it broke the femur bone. And I was laying there on the ground, and all I can see is this part of my leg. This part was gone. I thought I'd lost my leg. Knocked the wind out of me. When I got my breath back, I guess it came back in such a piercing shriek that everybody came running. Everybody dropped their tools and came running to see what was going on. But anyway, we had a doctor by the name of Mango and Dr. Hickman. And Dr. Hickman was probably from here to the parking lot from me when it happened. And he came running over and he made the guard shuck the pick off the metal part off of the pick that I had and pulled my leg out from underneath of me. And he had some tape and he taped it to my leg. Then he got one of the guys cut a limb off of a tree and stuck it on the inside for an inside brace. He got me put in they got a truck out there, put me in a truck, and I bounced all the way back into camp. They cleaned me up when I got back to camp, the corpsman did. You were just sleeping on the floor. Put me on the floor. And I laid there for 6 days. With a 5-grain aspirin tablet is all I had. That's all Dr. Hickman had. Well, that lasted about 10 seconds, but I was in misery. It really snapped the leg. They talked about taking it off, and I said, "You're not taking my leg. No way." But I laid there for 6 days, and a Japanese guard came in and told me they were bringing a small steamer in, and they were going to put me on a steamer and take me to Manila, to the hospital in Manila. That's how I wound up in Bilibid prison in Manila. And I can remember laying in bed there. The morning that they'd taken me in there. And the corpsman had cleaned me up because I was all dirt and everything. The corpsman had cleaned me up, and Dr. Wade, Lieutenant Commander Wade, the Navy doctor, he and Dr. Nelson. How do I know that the leg is smashed, So he measured it. It was 3 inches shorter than my right leg. So they knew they were in trouble. Anyway, the next morning, I was laying there in bed, and a Navy corpsman come in. It was 0600 in the morning, and said, "We're going to wash you up." So they gave me a hand bath. And about 0830 or 0900, 8 or 9:30, Dr. Nelson came in. He was an orthopedic surgeon. He was a full lieutenant. They drilled a hole in my knee. Nothing. There's no morphine or no antibiotics or anything like that. They drilled a hole in my knee, my left knee, and pulled my leg out. And just by feel alone, because we had no x-ray, no nothing, they wouldn't let us have any of that stuff. Just by feel, they reset my leg. Then they put me in a tape traction. And I was in tape traction in bed for 4 months. Yeah, I guess it was for 4 months. And Lieutenant Nelson Dr. Nelson came in one morning and he said, "How do you feel?" And I said, "Good enough to walk." I thought I was good enough to walk. So he brought a pair of crutches over to me and handed them to me. And he said, "Now don't do anything stupid." The week before, a friend of mine, good shipmate of mine, Sparks, had come in from Nichols Field and he was skin and bones. Of course, I was getting down there. I'd lost 40, 50 pounds already. They brought Sparks in, put him in the ward next to where I was at. So I was going to get up and go see Sparks. And it had been raining. I got as far as the ward, put the crutches down like that, and they slid out from underneath of me. And they went down right on this leg, and I heard it crack again. A couple officers there helped me up, helped me get back over to my ward. Didn't see Sparks. I was back in bed for 2 more months. He had nothing to set it with or anything. And it was sore. And I mean, my leg would just swell up. They formed a detail. I had to go out on a detail work. I went to Zablin Field. And I told the doctor the first day I was there what had happened. So they put me on a sick detail. Take a room about this big, put a sheet of canvas down, take raw corn right off the cob, field corn, just shell it, and we would walk with a roller. You know, you've seen these rollers that are loaded with water. You push them along and flatten things out. We had to crush all this corn that was on that canvas. It just but damn near kill you. It just eating your heart out. We'd roll that corn until it was crushed so they could boil that, and that was what we had for breakfast. Boiled, crushed corn. My leg got so bad that they sent me back to Bilibid. Well, I'm in Bilibid a month. They want to send me to Cabana de Juan. So I go to Cabana de Juan on a train, 100 guys in a boxcar, the 2/3 the size of our regular boxcars. Got to Cabana de Juan, see the guys that instead of going to Camp 3, they'd close Camp 3 in the meantime because it was nothing but filth. And they had opened up Camp 1, which was closer to Cabana de Juan. They put me in Camp 1. And they had me working the farm. My leg was still giving me great pain and swelling and everything. I went from there. They needed a detail in Manila, so I'm back on a train going to Manila. We get to Bilibid, and they've made room in the front of the prison for the work details. So I worked at Pendacan, which when we had it was the oil depot for the Philippine Army and for us and for everybody else. So I was working Pendacan. And about that time they were shipping guys out of the country, putting them on transports and taking them, but we didn't know where. So they took the men that were working the port area, took a 500 or 600 man detail out of Cabana de Juan, and our little 50-man detail out of Bilibid, out of the prison. 1,352 of us. This is now July of 43. We go aboard ship. My number was 1506. So, I'm one of the last ones going on. We go up the gangway on a Japanese transport. And I get to the top, And it was just like being in hell. Men are laying everywhere, gasping for air. They run them down into the holes, and the holes were so hot, it wasn't enough air for anybody, and they'd pass out. As a man would go down the ladder, they'd pass another one up over their heads. That's how they got them out. They just passed them over their heads, up out of the ladders. And it was like being in hell. But that afternoon, they decided that they were going to lose all 1,500 of us if they didn't do something. So they moved 900 of us up to the forward hole. It was a bigger hole. 900 men in a compartment maybe 3 times the size of this room. You can't lay down. All you can do is stand, and you're just shoulder to shoulder. And men are screaming and men are crying, and it was a living hell. And for a latrine, we had 3 5-gallon, not 5 gallons, they were 30-pound fruit tins. Strawberries, peaches come in them. We had 3 of those for 900 men. And they'd have to hoist them up out of the hole. They'd tip over. There'd be guys laying in it. Just you were so sick you couldn't do anything about it.
Mr. Reynolds, I appreciate the time that you've given me.
I would leave my hearing aids at home.
I appreciate the time you've given me and you sharing your story with me. I appreciate the honor that you've given our country. I appreciate the dignity that you showed our country. And I thank you.
Thank you.